September 23, 2025. That's the date we're looking at today. Hualien County, Taiwan. Super Typhoon Ragasa hit.
Yeah, and, a super typhoon is always going to be a major event. Always destructive.
Absolutely. But the reason we're doing this deep dive isn't just the storm itself. The really catastrophic part, the environmental disaster, that came hours after landfall.
Right. It was driven by a very specific geological failure, a sort of critical weakness in the landscape.
So today we're not just analyzing like a standard weather disaster.
No, not at all. It's more about the convergence, isn't it? This extreme weather event hitting a known, very localized vulnerability.
Our sources really detail how all that heavy rain got, well, almost weaponized, turned into this incredibly destructive, fast-moving force.
Wiped out infrastructure right across Hualien.
So our mission here is to, get past the headlines. We want to unpack the exact mechanism of how this happened.
Understand that chain reaction.
Exactly. The super typhoon set the scene, sure. But what was that fatal flaw in the terrain? And why was the flood that followed so uniquely devastating for Guangfu Township?
Well, the setting is really crucial here. Hualien was already, bracing for the worst.
They'd upgraded the storm warnings.
Yeah, upgraded to super typhoon status. They'd already issued evacuation orders for, I think, over 10,000 residents.
Wow.
And the alerts were high for flash floods, landslides, the usual suspects with a storm that big.
The warnings were severe, definitely. Yeah. But maybe they didn't quite capture the nature of the geological threat just waiting there.
That's the key difference.
Okay, let's dig right into that specific threat then. Because the sheer power of Ragasa, that was, only half the story, wasn't it?
Right.
The event that caused the really catastrophic localized damage, the thing that defines this tragedy, was the failure of the Matai'an Creek barrier lake.
Yeah.
Now, for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with that term, what exactly is a barrier lake? And, why is its failure potentially so much worse than, say, a controlled breach of a man-made dam?
That's a really good point for context. A barrier lake, it's essentially a temporary natural dam.
Temporary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Formed when something like a landslide or maybe volcanic debris blocks up a river channel. They're often pretty unstable, not engineered like a concrete dam, obviously.
Right, not built to hold water back permanently.
Exactly. And the sources confirm this Matai'an Creek feature. It was a result of earlier geological activity nearby. So inherently weak, made of loose sediment, soil, unconsolidated material.
Stuff that gets waterlogged easily.
Precisely. So when you get continuous torrential rain from a super typhoon soaking into that structure becomes, a ticking time bomb. It's susceptible to complete failure, not just spilling over the top.
That structural weakness, that explains the predictability issue we need to talk about later. But stay on the event itself for a moment. We have a pretty precise timeline. Around 2:50 p.m. local time, the heavy rains triggered the breach.
That's right.
And the sources mention this key detail, kind of shocking really, that underlines just how ferocious this flood was. The Matai'an Creek barrier lake didn't just overflow once.
No.
It failed and then overflowed twice. Can you sort of walk us through what that means, the significance of that second, almost immediate failure?
Yeah, that detail is absolutely critical if you want to understand the hydrodynamics of the destruction.
Okay.
So when that first overflow or breach happened, it likely scoured away and weakened whatever was left of the natural dam structure.
Yeah, it even weaker.
Right. Now, the water rushing out of even a compromised barrier lake is incredibly powerful. But a second failure, that means you get two successive waves of peak discharge hitting the area, probably within minutes of each other.
Oh, like a 1-2 punch.
Exactly. This compound event, it maximizes the erosive power. And, crucially, it introduces a massive amount of heavy sediment into the flow.
So we're talking about two peaks of force, bam, bam, one right after the other. No chance for the first wave's momentum to even slow down.
That's it precisely. And the result of this double breach wasn't your standard floodwater.
No.
No. The sources describe it as a tsunami-like wall of mud and water. That's the difference between, just water and what the sources call this viscous slurry.
Viscous slurry. Sounds nasty.
It is. Think less like rushing water, more like, a high-density, heavy mix. Water, sediment, rocks, debris, all churned together.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And this slurry, it increases the destructive kinetic energy exponentially. It's not just flowing water. It's got the physical density, the sheer weight, almost like wet concrete, hitting structures at high speed.
A tsunami-like wall of mud? that kind of force, it wouldn't just flood an area, would it? It sounds like it would just obliterate things.
It literally swallowed Guangfu Township whole, as one source put it.
Swallowed it whole.
Yeah, and it means anyone caught in its path had basically no time to react. You go from heavy rain to suddenly being overwhelmed by this high-velocity mudslide.
The force and the speed just immediate.
Truly immediate. And you can almost visualize the terror from the eyewitness footage described in the sources. People desperately climbing onto car roofs for safety.
Oh.
Only to have this surge of mud and water just drown everything moments later. The streets just instantly became these raging, high-impact rivers.
Which confirms those reports that the floodwaters hit rooftop levels almost instantly in some places.
Yeah, it explains that horrifying speed and height.
Okay, so let's shift now from that immediate chaos to tallying up the longer-term cost.
Yeah.
Because that one localized event, the collapse of just one geological feature, it had these ripple effects, created a systemic failure across Hualien County.
The physical cost really confirms the immense force of that slurry we were talking about. We're seeing a total breakdown of essential connective tissue for the region.
Like the Matai'an Creek Bridge.
Yep. Exactly. A necessary crossing point just immediately fractured local transit.
And Taiwan Railways Guangfu Station. Submerged under black silt.
Completely neutralized. I mean, that kind of damage to a railway hub, it doesn't just stop service for a day or two. It needs massive dredging structural inspections. It could isolate communities for weeks.
And the isolation wasn't just the rail lines, right? Highways 9 and 11, the main coastal routes.
Shut down. Those are the primary north-south supply routes. So shutting them down doesn't just cause traffic jams. It severs the logistic lines for food, medical supplies, heavy rescue equipment, everything.
Yeah, everything needed to actually respond to the disaster.
Correct. So you combine that transport lockdown with widespread power outages, the logistical challenge just becomes immense.
Which explains why they suspended classes and work in Guangfu the next day, September 24th.
Absolutely. The focus had to shift immediately from just dealing with the storm to a full-scale emergency recovery. The entire support structure for that community had basically failed.
And unfortunately, the human toll is always the starkest measure of this kind of localized fury. The sources detail the search and rescue dealing with a grim situation.
Yeah, at least 2 people confirmed dead initially, and 30 listed as missing, likely caught in that mud slurry or just swept away.
30 missing. That's awful.
And we can't overlook the nearly 300 people who were stranded on rooftops.
300.
Almost 300. When floodwaters are hitting roof levels, your immediate priority is mass rescue, aerial, boats, which is incredibly hard to coordinate when your main roads are out and the power grid is down.
That one statistic, 300 people trapped, it just showcases the immediate, life-threatening scale of the disaster that erupted right after that breach.
It really does.
Now, what's fascinating here, and this is where we get into the real insight for this deep dive, is the context around these tragic numbers. The source material connects this immediate chaos back to something broader. Experts had warned about this exact instability, the risk of that specific barrier lake failing. They warned about it weeks ago.
Yeah, and this is where we link the geology back to the bigger picture, the global conversation.
Because if the vulnerability was known...
Right. If it was known that the Matai'an Creek Barrier Lake was basically a temporary structure prone to catastrophic failure,
then the disaster becomes less about just an unpredictable storm.
And more about a predictable convergence.
Yeah.
It frames the whole incident as a stark reminder of climate chaos in 2025, as one source puts it, because we're seeing these supercharged natural events like Ragasa, stress testing known geological weaknesses.
Weaknesses that were already there.
Exactly. The predictability was based on that inherent weakness of a natural dam made of loose stuff, just waiting for the trigger. And Ragasa provided that trigger with unprecedented rainfall.
But, okay, if the geological vulnerability was known weeks beforehand, it raises a really tough question, doesn't it? Why wasn't more aggressive mitigation possible? And the sources highlight this really painful contradiction. You have the warning, then you have the tragedy, but then right amid all that heartbreak, the community response was apparently immediate and huge.
The contrast is really palpable when you read the accounts. You have the systemic failure, the infrastructure, the power, the known geological flaw failing.
Met with just this overwhelming human resilience.
Yeah. The sources note how communities just rallied instantly after the destruction hit, coordinating local efforts, helping stranded neighbors, starting the initial cleanup, often way before official state aid could even get into the isolated region.
Incredible. So wrapping this up, what does it all mean? our deep dive into the chaos of September 23rd, 2025.
Hmm.
It really shows this deadly synergy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The immense sustained power of Super Typhoon Ragasa hitting that known geological vulnerability, the Matai'an Creek Barrier Lake.
Which failed catastrophically, delivering that high-velocity mud tsunami that just isolated and, well, erased parts of Guangfu Township.
And the core takeaway for you, listening to this, has to be the sheer localized intensity that happens when these natural defenses fail so rapidly. It's not just a flood. It's a specific failure mechanism.
And the human tragedy, the 2 dead, the 30 missing, those 300 stranded, that was the direct result of that sudden twin overflow turning rain into something like viscous concrete.
Precisely.
The sources mentioned this tragedy was predictable. We keep coming back to that. Yet, we also see these inspiring stories of community action right afterwards.
Yeah.
And this just raises a massive question for modern society.
Yeah.
Especially as we look ahead at potentially more severe weather and known vulnerabilities around the world.
It really does. How should we, as a modern society, best balance things? On one hand, you have the long-term, expensive, often politically really difficult preparations needed to mitigate known risks.
Like reinforcing weak geological features or maybe even relocating vulnerable populations.
Exactly. Balancing that against relying on the immediate, often inspiring, but ultimately incredibly costly resilience of local communities when disaster inevitably strikes anyway.
It really makes you think about planning versus response, doesn't it? And where the most critical investment truly lies when we know these kinds of failures are not just possible, but in some places, maybe statistically inevitable.
It's a calculation, isn't it? A calculation that sort of defines the cost of living in our modern world, facing these intensified natural threats.